In episodes 6 and 7, we touched upon Elon and Tesla's general strategy for jump-starting the energy revolution. In this episode, it's time to take a look at the obstacles, both business and societal, that Tesla faced as it tried to implement that strategy. As you probably know, it has been anything but easy.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
The word revolution should not be thrown around lightly, and I certainly don't do so here. What Elon was attempting to do with energy, starting with the first step of introducing electric cars, was nothing short of fundamentally transforming the way the world makes and uses energy. In other words, a revolution. We briefly touched upon this in episode 7 when we talked about Elon's master plan, part 3. The scale that he alluded to there encompassed the entire planet. The wonder is that in 2023, this goal, though rightly intimidating, actually seems plausible. But a mere 20 years ago, it probably seemed more like fantasy. The first most visible step in this journey was starting the electric vehicle, or EV, revolution. Because I want to go over this process in more detail than in the initial episodes, which were more like overviews, there will necessarily be more history, though not too much. It ought to be remembered that there is nothing more difficult to take in hand, more perilous to conduct, or more uncertain in its success than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order of things, because the innovator has, for enemies, all those who have done well under the old conditions, and lukewarm defenders and those who may do well under the new. This coolness arises partly from fear of the opponents, who have the laws on their side, and partly from the incredulity of men, who do not readily believe in new things until they have had a long experience of them. This quote was used by Jimmy Soni at the beginning of his book, The Founders, which was about the PayPal story, of which Elon Musk was an integral part. But it could apply equally well to Tesla's story. After all, Elon's grand vision of changing the world requires nothing less than massive disruption in existing systems and ways of thought. But it should be pointed out again that Elon isn't about rocking the boat for its own sake. Disruption for him is about making things better, getting rid of inefficiencies. So when Elon decided to make electric cars, it wasn't just about reducing fossil fuel usage. It also happened to be that he thought electric cars were better than internal combustion engine, or ICE, cars. As many people know, Elon Musk did not technically found Tesla, although he is legally permitted by legal settlement to call himself a founder. Tesla Motors Incorporated was founded on July 1, 2003, by Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpenning. But Elon was hardly someone who just stumbled across a young electric car company and threw money at them because it sounded like a cool idea. Again, his interest in EVs went all the way back to at least college, when, as we mentioned in episode 6, Elon was so enamored of electric cars that they were once the first thing he mentioned to a girl he took out on a date. As somebody who had obviously studied electric cars, it's a safe bet that Elon knew, even in the 90s, that electric cars were actually far more efficient at converting electrical energy to kinetic energy than gas cars were at converting chemical energy to kinetic energy. As an engineer and scientist at heart who looks at products from a first principles perspective, electric cars just made a lot of sense. This interest in electric cars may specifically have been what first inspired him to enter a PhD program in materials science at Stanford in the fall of 1995, even though he didn't stay long. As Tim Higgins writes in Power Play, shortly after finishing there, Musk and his best friend Robin Wren drove across the U.S. to study at Stanford. Musk wanted to go deep into energy physics, convinced he could make radical advances in battery technology. Musk would have known that battery technology was the primary limiting factor keeping electric cars from being very practical. This, after all, has been common knowledge for years to anyone who has paid attention to electric cars. After Elon's time at PayPal, his second internet venture, was over, he immediately began looking around for new projects in energy and space. We know that he started SpaceX in May 2002, and he threw himself wholeheartedly into building that company. Then in the fall of 2003, J.B. Straubel, an engineer out of Stanford and future Tesla co-founder, contacted Musk and pitched him a project he'd been working on. Straubel announced his electric car project. The crazy idea struck an immediate chord with Musk, who had been thinking about electric vehicles for years. While Musk had mostly focused on using ultracapacitors for the vehicles, he was thrilled and surprised to hear how far lithium-ion battery technology had progressed. From this quote alone, we find out that Elon had been pondering how to design electric cars for years, even to the point of weighing the kind of technology that might work best. Thus, when Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpenning, the original Tesla founders, also contacted Musk about investing in their young company in early 2004, they found someone who was very receptive. By about April of that year, Musk had committed $6.35 million in cash to Tesla. Now, there are certain people who have suggested that the reason Elon got into electric cars was to get rich. This is totally bonkers. He has always known that starting a car company was extremely risky and has said many times over the years that he figured Tesla had only about a 10% chance of succeeding. Smart, rich people, whose main objective is to make more money, don't risk their hard-earned wealth on low-probability ventures. They are risk-averse. So if his objective had been to make money, he could have, maybe started an internet company instead, which is what he did do. Twice. Now, to be honest, there were some advantages to starting an EV company in the early 2000s. It's been reported, in fact, that Elon began thinking about manufacturing EVs when he realized no other main manufacturer was doing it. Right around the time that Tesla was first looking for investors, for instance, General Motors was reclaiming their electric car, the EV1, from all leaseholders and shutting down the program altogether, concluding that they could not sell the EV1 profitably. So, Tesla had no competition. Also, battery technology, as mentioned above, had improved a lot and promised to get even better and progressively cheaper with continued research. But that was about it for the pros. On the other hand, there were some massive cons. One of the biggest was that the whole world's transportation system, with few exceptions, ran on petroleum derivatives. That meant that the entire infrastructure was designed to support gas vehicles. In real terms, this meant that if you, the consumer, drove your electric car far enough away from home, there was no convenient place to recharge, and you would be stuck. Or even if you could charge up, early versions of electric cars took hours to fully recharge. And what if your car broke down? Just as there was an entire network of gas stations, there was also a large network of repair shops, but they were all trained to fix gas engines only. And then another aspect of the world's oil infrastructure itself is that the oil companies are huge and have a vested interest in preserving the world's addiction to oil. This is a chart from Wikipedia of the world's top 10 largest corporations by revenue, based on the most recent fiscal year data. You'll notice that 5 of the top 10 are in the oil and gas industry, fully half of the entire chart. What's more, compare Saudi Aramco's profits to Walmart's. Walmart does a lot of business, but it operates on thin margins, which means that although it has a lot of revenue, its profits pale in comparison to Saudi Aramco's. And then you have entire countries like Brunei, Kuwait, and Libya, whose economies are entirely dependent on oil exports. Couple that with the oil shipping and refining industries, side industries like fertilizer, and distribution networks in the form of wholesale and retail gas stations, and you have millions of jobs that are directly connected to the continued flow of oil. All this is to say that taken together, on the buy side as well as the sell side, there is a tremendous amount of money serving as a powerful incentive for the current energy infrastructure to stay in place, or at least not change too quickly. Although there are certainly people who believe that big oil and the auto companies have actively conspired to destroy electric cars, my own meager research into this is inconclusive. Also, there has clearly been government support for years of EV adoption, in the form of incentives that make buying an EV cheaper and easier, which you would think wouldn't exist if huge corporations had lobbied properly. So overall, I won't comment on whether there have been dirty tricks by enemies of the electric car. What we do know is that oil has been extremely effective as an energy source for a long time. It's been cheap, plentiful, relatively easy to transport, and is very, very energy dense. So the world's addiction to oil was mainly a matter of economics. And trying to replace oil would also therefore require a major economic incentive to persuade consumers to give up what they were happy with, to go in another direction that promised to be even better. When you have this kind of a situation where one form of energy is so efficient, with so many upsides versus acceptable downsides, such as pollution and wars somewhere very far away, it's easy to see why so many industries would also be built around cheap oil, particularly transportation. It's also understandable, therefore, why the oil and automotive industries never considered electric cars much of a threat until these last few years. We'll talk about that also more in depth in a later episode. So to sum up, almost the entire world's energy and transportation infrastructure is based on fossil fuels, and yet a few hardy souls, again, Elon was not the first, a few hardy souls thought it was possible to get the world off its oil addiction. And even fewer were willing to commit their considerable private wealth to this end. That would indeed be crazy. It sounds like a recipe for failure, if not outright disaster. But that's what Elon actually did. If there is anything I want to impress upon people, it's the enormity of this decision and how much pain and effort was required to stay dedicated to it, because the specter of public failure and humiliation was never very far away in Tesla's first 15 to 16 years. But as big as infrastructure limitations were, though, there was arguably an even bigger, more intimidating obstacle to starting the EV revolution. And that is what we'll focus on in the next episode.